So today I have Rob Mandanici from Paddington Realty in Perth joining us. Rob, thank you for jumping on board.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I call you an industry friend. I've known you for a number of years and you are very well regarded in the industry. And I love the way you work, and I love the legal brain that you have. Like the intelligence, I know that sounds really a funny thing to say, but the intelligence behind your advice, I truly do value. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about this subject today, because we're going to talk about the legislation and the need for it to be modernised and proposed changes, etc. But before we get into that, for those that don't know you, can you give us a brief history about how you sort of got into property management and your career and where you're at now?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a good one. I started, splitting hairs, but probably in my 21st year in real estate and in property management. Started out probably around 16 years old, in fact, so maybe a bit more than 21 years, but started out about 16 working for a local agent in the city of Melbourne, doing all the things that, probably doing a heap of jobs that don't exist right now. Getting the newspapers, cutting the ads out, pasting them into a scrapbook, counting how many letters and lines there were, typing up an invoice. Again, all things that would be foreign probably to anyone starting in the industry today. Putting up pointer boards, which, I guess that still happens, but doing all that sort of legwork and realising it was actually a bit of fun. So they gave me a bit more to do, and then I found somewhere else to work who had a bit more to do and ended up falling into property management.
So did you ever do sales or any other position? Have you always been
not early on, no, PM only. So, and back when you were given a portfolio, which was normally the whole office portfolio of about 380, 390 properties. And I'm the first to admit you didn't do it well because you couldn't. I started in Melbourne, where you do a routine inspection every 6 months, or say 2 in a year. I'd probably doubt that, many of those properties had ever been inspected in 3 or 4 years. I won't say what company, I don't want to drop anyone in that, but, but the reality is one person cannot look after, that many properties effectively when expected to do everything.
Yeah.
But it was a good steep learning curve.
Yeah, wonderful. And how long have you been in Perth for?
About 13 years.
Is that all? It's not long, is it?
No. So I think my first memory of Perth was the big Perth storm, the one that caused all the hail damage and all of that. So.
Wow. See, I feel like I've known you for that long, but maybe I haven't known you for that long. Do you reckon?
Probably. Yeah, probably. Maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And what made you originally move to Perth?
So I had another business in mining exploration, and it was sort of just balancing a few things that we were doing. We had a small property management business in Melbourne, and I had this mining exploration business that was taking a bit of time and causing me to sort of travel between Melbourne and Perth. We were registered here. We had most of our projects in Western Australia. Most of our shareholders, investors were here. So spending a lot of time travelling back and forth and a lot of money. So we just thought, look, we'll give it a go. 12, 18 months, worst case, we'll just move back, 12, 13 years later.
Yes.
Still here.
Yes. Probably permanently, I would assume.
Well, yeah, I mean, we sold, we listed that business on the Australian Stock Exchange. I left that business a few years later, sitting at home thinking, what do we do? Go back to what you know.
And did you go straight into owning Paddington, or did you work somewhere else before starting the business?
No, straight into it.
With no regrets?
No.
Yeah.
I think, I think ultimately, anyone who says they have absolutely no regrets, I mean, you sit back and you say, I would have done that differently, or I may not have done that, or I may have been perhaps more aggressive on that front or a little more conservative on another. But, all in all, it's turned out okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we want to talk about the act. Now, the first question, and I just basically am just going to blurt my curiosity and get your opinion on your thoughts. But one thing that has always surprised me and frustrates me is why we don't have a nationwide legislation. Why state by state? Why, like, it's so frustrating. I just find we're in the same country. Why wouldn't we just have the same laws everywhere?
So I guess bringing it back to real estate and housing, the majority of, I guess, property law and tenancy law vests with the states. So, you know, that's the boring, dry, nerdy answer. On the flip side, the states could harmonise if they could all come to a common agreement, which is challenging. I mean, we have some harmonised law, obviously workplace law. You know, we have federal law, but we also have state law. Now, many of those state laws are harmonised in that they are the same. In real estate, I think, you know, we heard the area of national licensing is probably a great example in that, you know, it's taken 10 plus years, I think, for national licensing now to be truly national. With, I think, WA and maybe one other state or territory finally coming online very shortly with a national licensing and national training sort of platform or alignment or whatever you want to call it. So it's tough. It's tough when every state or territory can do their own thing. To bring them into line is very tough. Personally, I'm not an advocate of that. I think, you know, the state having their right to make their own laws in relation to tenancy and property law is important. It creates competition amongst states. You know, and we'd probably, you know, in an ideal market, you know, investors, say, for example, would flock to states with, you know, I guess, more liberal or more flexible laws in relation to property, and those with more rigid laws in an ideal market would flow away or shy away from those states.
Yeah, I love that answer, that because it's just, I felt like there was a reason, but I just wasn't sure of hearing someone else's point of view, I guess, of it. So, I mean, that totally makes sense. Do you feel like with the proposed legislation, though, that's coming into WA, that they are trying to harmonise with other states?
I think it's a little harmonisation by stealth. Some of the proposals put forward, you know, very much mirror what goes on in other states. So we sort of say, well, they're different laws, but they're similar, very similar. And, you know, the one perhaps around pets or, you know, around the right to pets or no reason evictions or whatever you want to call, however you want to dress that one up or whatever it's called in other states, or a no grounds termination, it's the same premise. So there is a bit of that, and there is a bit of that alignment, and it seems to cross, I'll sort of say to some degree, some of them even cross party lines, with, you know, Victoria having recently reformed their legislation, New South Wales having some reforms on the table, both being different, you know, different colours of government, so to speak. The ACT doing something similarly, and now Western Australia.
Do you think at the moment, just because it's in the media so much, do you think as a society or as an industry that maybe we're making a bit of a hoo-ha over it too much before it's even come in place? Or do you think we need to be vocal about it now and with the intention of potentially getting a more fairer outcome?
I think it's important because there is a consultation and decision paper on the table out of the department. I think it's important that the department, the government and stakeholders, you know, perhaps consider some of the unconsidered areas of the changes. All laws have unintended consequences, and, you know, perhaps let's go back to March 2020. That feels like a long time ago. It's been a long 2 years. But March 2020, when the government, you know, talked about moratoriums, and I guess they were warned at the time that, you know, whilst it may have been a good idea and to put those in place for some people in certain circumstances, you know, no one wanted to be homeless or without shelter during a pandemic when there were lots of unknowns around the situation. but the longer term effect of that, those unintended consequences we've seen now, the deferment or delay in price rises, in rental increases, the delays to the natural market, and then what that does, I guess, to the psyche of an investor. And I think it's important. It was important then for industry groups and lobby groups and others to point out to the government, what effect that might have on others, what effect that has on homelessness, what effect that has on, people already marginalised. And I think that's important for organisations to be doing that now as an industry, as individuals, as property managers, say through our real estate institutes and property institutes and other organisations, to just make that point to government that, perhaps while we may not deny the Act needs modernisation, that we have to look at it from all angles at the moment.
Yeah, and granted, there's some pretty fair things that can be modernised that I totally agree with. And again, just this is all like personal opinion, but I actually don't mind the idea of rent increases potentially not being as frequent as every 6 months. I think that's actually reasonable. And I also think that it's potentially reasonable to have some sort of capping on rent increases as well. But I actually haven't properly read the proposed changes, but in terms of rent increases, because you're going to save me having to read it by giving me the answer, but how would they actually, what are they proposing the method would be? Are they suggesting CPI or an actual percentage, or like what are they potentially proposing for rent increases to be capped by?
Yeah, so not so much a cap per se, but more around the frequency. And look, the interesting thing around the rental increase proposal would have to be, I really don't think there are that many property managers, and I'll talk property managers because they're the ones that we know. I mean, maybe private landlords do things a bit differently, and look, let's face it, quite often it's the private landlords that maybe get themselves into a bit of trouble. But, from the majority of property managers I know and professionally manage properties, there's very few mid-term rental increases. And I just think that, from the indications the government's given is that, that is an area they want to tighten up on. And yeah, ultimately, I think that's one thing that probably needs modernising. And there may be a fair argument to say, well, a contract entered into, if the rent is, say, $400 a week for 12 months, the rent is $400 for 12 months. I think if property managers still have a fair number of review mechanisms at the end, be it market, CPI, or some form of fixed review or fixed percentage or dollar, then I think that probably finds or strikes a happy sort of middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, that's the real easy one for us to discuss because, yeah, I agree. I think that's not going to be an issue. The pets, I don't think it's a big issue, but what do you hear on the street? Like, are people concerned by that?
Well, look, I think on the pets one, and I'm not spouting any government or any persuasion of political colour here, but the reality is, from the Australian Labor Party's point of view, pets in tenancies are in their policy platform. It's in their psyche. In their view, and look, I think maybe to some degree they're not wrong. Pets do form part of people's families. I know in our business, overwhelmingly, most tenants have pets. Majority of owners, I think, and again, professional landlords understand that, pets are part of the family and all of that. I think the concern there is, again, though, around, don't tell me what to do with my property. But I think it comes down to a lot of education. And look, I think we've all got stories or circumstances where, let's set pets aside for a minute. There's so many other factors in a tenancy that can do more damage than pets. And, then people say, the old, I don't want children, I don't want this. And again, I've never seen children or pets do more damage than a pair of humans, than grown adult humans. So I think when we boil it down, we can insure against pet damage. One aspect I think that's got to be looked at to mitigate anything has to be increasing the bond, multiple bonds perhaps for pets, 2 dogs, 2 bonds, a larger bond, and I think a bit more flexibility around those bond arrangements.
Yeah, I agree. I'm doing a bit of an advocacy thing at the moment, which is don't remove owners' rights, but give tenants more options. And I'm a firm believer that with these proposed changes, I don't believe we should necessarily take anything away, but I think giving more options, and like, you know, the pet bond, maybe it's multiple pet bonds, or an increase in the pet bond, and same with increases. Like, I just feel like just having more options for tenants is more important. And you're right, it's that whole cycle of don't tell me what to do with my property. And I'm going to be the first just to say it, and whether people agree with this or don't agree, there's going to be mixed reviews. But I feel like they're trying to making it fairer for owners and tenants and bringing everyone on the same playing field. And I'm sorry, I think that if the owner has invested their money and taken the risk to be a homeowner, and they've done that as part of a retirement plan, children's education, whatever it may be, I do believe they should actually have some stronger rights than when it comes to the tenants. And there are going to be people that don't agree with that statement, but I don't actually believe it should be an even playing field.
Yeah, look, someone made a very, very interesting comment today on social media, funny enough, and it was around, there's an article going around where, you know, some questions were asked of an employer, and look, the employer happened to be the state secretary of a union, and, you know, the state secretary believed that the questions were too invasive. And there was a comment on Facebook. In fact, a mutual friend of ours made a comment, and I said something, and someone else chimed in with something I thought was very, you know, very, very clever and very pertinent. And, you know, it boiled down to the bank has one risk. The bank needs to make sure that you pay your mortgage. But the landlord or the agent have multiple risks. Not only do we need to make sure that you pay your rent so the landlord can pay their mortgage, but furthermore, looking after that property, the upkeep of the property, and everything that goes with it around the assessment of the ability, the affordability. There's a lot more to it than just making sure that you pay that mortgage. You know, the bank doesn't care. Beyond paying the mortgage, can you service the mortgage? Yes. Here's the money. They don't care if you change the colour. They don't care if you knock the home down. They do not care what you do with that property. You know, we've got a lot more sort of balls in the air when it comes to that, or as a landlord and the person we're representing. You know, and I think that nailed it in terms of what, you know, I guess what risk we're holding and what risk the landlord's holding.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the risk we're actually going to have is that if an owner doesn't have a benefit to having an investment property, why would we get investors buy more properties? And then we get less investors, less properties on the market, rents go up. I mean,
you see a lot of throwaway lines of, well, you know, rents should be capped at the price of the mortgage.
Oh, well, really? I haven't seen that one before.
I've seen a lot of commentary around that. I mean, and again, it's a lot of throwaway stuff, and you know, I really should do my mental health some service and not read the comments, in a lot of these online newspapers and whatnot. But you know, there are genuinely people out there who think that rents should be capped to mortgages, that rents shouldn't go up more than a mortgage. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, that's not a free market.
That's just stupid.
It is.
Absolutely stupid.
It is, but they're out there.
Yes, they are. Well, the one that I see on TikTok lately is that investors are predators, and that's basically how young people are seeing investors, that they're predators, that they're taking advantage of buying properties because of rents. And it's why they say that if investors didn't snap up all the properties, there would be more available for first home buyers to buy. And my opinion of that is, first of all, I work with a lot of interstate investors, and I can tell you right now, they do not overpay for the property. They are looking for a bargain just like everybody else. Yep. But the second thing is that these young people, I mean, I say young people because it generally is, that want to have an opinion and say, oh, well, we can't buy property. How many of them have actually been to a mortgage broker, actually had their finances assessed, know how much they need to save and what their plan is to buy a property? Because I can tell you right now, I reckon 95% of them have never gone down that road, but they just like to have, you know, blame other people when they can't afford to buy a property. So that really bugs me a lot at the moment.
Yeah, look, and you know, just to sort of dispel some of the myths around that, and look, this is ATO data. So, you know, we'd like to think that what's going in the tax returns, people aren't lying at least about where they're earning their income from. Top 7 property investors by occupation. Number 1 is school teachers. Number 2 is nurses. Number 3 is healthcare professionals, excluding nurses. Number 4 is accountants. You know, number 5, IT professionals. 6, defence and emergency service workers, including police and fire and AMBOs. And 7 is electricians. So, you know, a reasonable cross-section of society, not necessarily in what many might assume to be really high income or, you know, high, you know, those high income earning professions. I mean, look, obviously around some of those trades they are, you know, but I think, you know, around the usual school teachers and nurses, police officers, you know, they are the most common investor in our market.
Wow, I never knew that. That's amazing.
And, you know, we're talking a single or couple, you know, and you just sort of think about it, you know, a lot of people like to, demonise or paint a landlord as a big corporation. You know, ultimately, you know, quite often than not, and this is based on tax office data, mum, dad, police officer, nurse or school teacher, doctor, earning a reasonable sort of median income. And as you sort of point earlier, putting away for their kids' education or, you know, having something over and above their superannuation, you know, to cover themselves, you know, when they get older or unwell.
Yeah. Do you think that there is more that could be done with the availability of like state housing and government housing, and is that an issue that should be focused on a bit more? And I'll just throw in a comment that I've seen someone say about it, is that should there be an overhaul and a check of state housing to make sure that there's families and not single people living in houses that, you know, that could potentially be like put families in these state housing and making sure they're not just single occupancy. Like, I don't know, it's easier to say than actually do, but that's sort of a comment that I thought, well, you know what, that actually sort of makes sense.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, I think the government's probably always got to be mindful about who is in social housing. I mean, is it, you know, I think the government's got to have a clear agenda. Is social housing a long-term proposition, or is social housing just there to simply get someone back on their feet and back into the private market? You know, and this sort of throws up a few things now. To bring all these changes in now rapidly, it's potentially the wrong time. And, you know, as I sort of say, it's not that the Act doesn't need modernising. I think it does. And I don't think there's any property manager that wouldn't disagree with that. You've always got to review your legislation, you know, public sentiment changes and needs change. To bring it in at a point in time when we've got the lowest vacancy rates on record, some of the highest rents on record, is a recipe for disaster, and that's those unintended consequences. But we talk about public housing, and again, I think public housing has to be fit for purpose. We've got singles on the waiting list, we've got families. There's got to be room for both. You know, we've got to look at public housing now, I think, as more flexible arrangements. I think we've probably got more single people homeless than ever, or without homes, in particular women 50 and over. And that, unfortunately, is a growing or emerging group of people without homes. There's only so much that the private or charity sector can do. So government has to come to the party. The scary thing is, and around some of the modelling that's being done, just the effects of a few key changes proposed to the Act could add anywhere from $500 million to $1.3 billion of additional investment required in public housing for the investors, the private investors that may exit the market. You know, so the government's really got to think long and hard about the changes they're going to implement or potentially implement, and what other effects they might have on the private, public, or the private and public housing sector.
Are we seeing, and I don't even know if you know this answer, are we seeing more state, like government housing coming on board? Is it their plan to provide more government housing or not?
Look, from the government's point of view, I mean, again, I don't speak for the government, but you know, the housing minister, you know, has made a number of announcements. I think, unfortunately, lately we've seen, you know, there's been, I think, a halt or a temporary halt put on the Common Ground project in the city of Perth. You know, again, that was to provide wraparound services. You know, I can sort of say in my own street where my office is, there's a number of public housing properties and public housing tenants. But there's also probably, as I look out there, 12 or 15 public housing homes that are empty. Now, some of them are being renovated, some of them are having heritage works done, so fairly significant, you know, heritage works underpinning and you know, structural work done. Some of them having more cosmetic work in terms of painting and refurbishment done. But as to what exactly is going on over there, I don't know. Work seems to have stopped for quite a number of weeks now, whether that's weather related, the ability of trades and services, I don't know, but it's actually quite sad to see that, you know, there are taxpayer funded homes in an area where there are a number of homeless people, and we get them sleeping on our front steps of our office and whatnot, in an area where there are wraparound services, just to see these homes sitting empty in various states of repair. You know, I don't think that's on. That's not good enough.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's such a big vicious problem, isn't it? I had a great story, and I don't think we hear enough of these great stories, but in our local council, I got invited to a seroptimus group, and they were telling me about a project that was happening locally where a whole heap of, and I can't say this word properly, philanthropists, I think I just said it, yes. Yeah. I always have to say it really slowly, philanthropists, where they have bought a huge amount of land and are funding a build which is specifically for over 55-year-old women and grand carers, so people that are caring for their grandchildren because their children aren't able to. And that's a fantastic project, and we're lucky to have people like that, but you don't hear those stories. But the other comment, I guess, is that I've heard people say is it's not our issue to solve the state housing problem. Yet, as property managers, we feel we are in a position to have to sort it out, but it's like it's been made our problem.
Yeah, look, and I think for many people it can feel like that. I mean, look, you know, you sort of talk property manager to property manager, you say, well, we see the market every day. We're not making up the prices. We're the ones receiving applications from people who are good tenants with good history, who have, when you're competing with, say, 15 or 20 other good tenants with good history for a property, they have no lever other than money. So that's why they're offering more rent. That's why they're offering rent up front. And again, we must be careful how we say that, because we're not encouraging it, of course, but they're coming to us because that's the only lever they've got. They come with good intention, that they're not, you know, 2 plus years ago, if someone came to you and offered more rent or rent up front, generally we'd probably give that a bit more scrutiny, because are they trying to mask some history perhaps and blind us with that carrot? Now, sometimes for some people, it's the only lever, you know, they've got. I mean, I had coffee with a landlord of mine yesterday, and she's looking at moving house herself. And she said, Rob, I don't know what to do. She said, I've got money in my savings. She doesn't have full-time work, and she doesn't have to work. But she said, I'm scared that I'm not going to find a property because, you know, the other person's going to get preference because they've got a full-time job or regular income. And she just said, oh, look, I've put 10 to 20 grand aside to move house. I mean, it's a big chunk of money to move house. And she said, oh, I think I'm just going to offer them the whole 20 grand up front, because that's her only lever. And, you know, she's not trying to, she's just trying to survive. She's just trying to move from home to home. You know, she's got good assets. She's got a good rental income coming through from another property. You know, good person, good history, but that's all she knows. She says, well, all I've got is money. All I've got is my savings, that I'll use that. You know, so, and I think that somehow we do feel responsible for solving it. Not that we should, but I also think a lot of people in our industry have some good ideas that I think, you know, can go some way to solving the crisis as well.
Yeah. What can we do as property managers directly? Like, I know that, you know, we're lucky with institutes and people that are advocating towards, you know, making the proposed changes fairer. Is there anything that we can do individually to support the changes or to have an opinion on it? Is there any avenue for us?
Yeah, look, I mean, full disclosure, board member of the Real Estate Institute of WA. I would sort of say that, as a peak industry body and peak advocate for real estate agents and property managers, I'd say to anyone who may not be a member or whose office may not be to join. I'd say in terms of some form of direct action towards homelessness or helping out there, we have a program that supports Salvation Army through the Community Reinvest program, where an office can commit a certain number of funds every month, I think starting at $40 to $50 per month. So a small contribution every month towards Salvation Army and the services that they deliver around homelessness and crisis accommodation, shelter, crisis payments, all of that sort of thing to people in need. I say outside of that, if there's an issue you sort of feel, deeply strongly about, I say to people, don't be afraid to communicate with your local member, your state member of parliament. They should be your conduit back to the parliament, back to the government and the departments. Short venting on Facebook for some people, that's a good avenue too to get it off your chest. But I think, ultimately, you've got to take it to the decision makers and those, those lobby groups and whatnot and stakeholders.
Yeah. That's a good tip for people that do want to get a bit more active in regards to having sort of a say and an opinion. I wanted to bring up an article that had been floating around a few weeks ago now, and it was about a lady that, and this is going into the no reason eviction, but it was about the lady that was given notice to vacate because she didn't accept some unfair conditions in her lease. And you know what, poor love, she shouldn't have had to deal with those conditions. But when I was reading a bit more of the article, and it turns out I think that it was a private landlord, I feel like the article was bringing attention to, no reason evictions, this is the reason why it shouldn't happen. But I actually looked at that and thought the real reason here was a private landlord. And I actually think that the issue was private landlords and not the no reason eviction, because I feel like if you had a property manager managing that property and you had an owner that wanted to put something stupid in, you would turn around to the landlord and say, I'm sorry, that's not allowed. We're not putting that in. So it brings me into, is that more of the issue, private landlords managing properties wrong? And is the proposed change a knee-jerk reaction into bad behaviour by private landlords?
Yeah, look, it's funny you sort of say that one. I'm thinking, which article were you going to mention? There's been a few lately.
Yeah.
That one there, I do recall. And my gut reaction to that was, only a private landlord would do this. And as I read the article, I was like, well, no grounds eviction is not the issue here. There are a lot of mechanisms already within the legislation that tenant had available to them to push back on that landlord. Removing no grounds evictions was not going to stop that landlord doing what he or she wanted to do. And we've probably all dealt with people like that. And as property managers and real estate agents and professionals, pushing back and saying, no, Ashley, you can't do that. If it gets down to the nuts and bolts, section whatever says you can't do this or you can only do this. We remove rent increases, we remove, the pet restriction. There is still going to be a small segment of landlords out there who do what they want. And they are the ones that will end up with a fine. They are the ones that will end up with a magistrate's court infringement or a SAT hearing or whatever, wherever it goes, like they do now. We still have, I think one of the key issues that the department still rails us all on is the lodgement of bonds. But when you scratch the detail, the non-lodgements overwhelmingly come from private landlords. Failure to deliver a PCR or failure to deliver a PCR within time. Sure, as agents, we're busy and we might be guilty of an accidental breach. and I'm not saying we're all pure on that, but, you know, you scratch the detail, and again, the overwhelming majority of, you know, discrepancies around PCRs tend to be from private landlords. Private landlords perhaps not providing a final condition report, not realising they have to, not realising you have to invite the tenant, whether they turn up or not, that's the tenant's choice. These things are still going to happen. Whether the law says so or not, they happen now, and they will then. Now, perhaps that tenant could have, you know, perhaps didn't feel empowered enough to push back and breach the owner, or say no to those unconscionable changes to the lease. You know, again, that comes down to, I guess, the tenant's desire to want to fight that.
Yeah, and it comes down to communication. And of course, like, I don't know their personal relationship in that story, but I feel like it would have been good if they were able to, like, if it was me, to call up and say, listen, what you're wanting to put in there is actually not in line with the legislation, but can I just get a bit of an idea of why you feel the need to put it in, so that we can sort of work out why? Because it might be a matter of saying, listen, the intention's okay. Like, I actually don't mind if you need to pop around to, I don't know, turn the retic on or whatever, you know, someone wants to do. I actually don't really mind per se. I don't want there to be, I don't want you to put something into the lease that's sort of against the law. But if your intention is that you just want to be able to pop around to do the gardening, we can work something out. You know, if you just, as long as you give me a couple of days notice or a day's notice, I'm okay with it. Like, that sort of conversation.
Absolutely. Look, absolutely. And again, you know, those that want to duck and dive and skirt around the rules, they're still going to be there, unfortunately. You know, and again, you know, I think some interesting stats on that no grounds is that 2/3 of all tenancies, you know, to date in the last 12 months, 18 months, have been ended by the tenant, not the owner. 1.8% of all evictions have been no grounds terminations. 1.8%.
So why is it such a big focus?
So the no grounds itself, you know, is rarely used, you know, and it is one of those levers that, I guess, from our point of view, or a landlord's point of view, that sometimes is used as an absolute last resort. Because let's face it, there normally is a reason. We want to sell, we want to move in, you've not paid your rent, you've got successive breaches, a public housing offer. You know, there's all sorts of, you know, there's all sorts of reasons that we might. In fact, I must say I've never used the public housing one in my life, but it's there. I'm yet to find a property manager that's used it, but, you know, it is there. Obviously, we've got, you know, uninhabitable, you know, if the premises has been destroyed or whatnot. You know, nearly 98 and a bit % of cases have a reason, but they really rally on about the no grounds. And I think, you know, going back to, you know, why the timing's not right, there's been about a 16,000 a reduction in properties of 16,000 or over 16,000 of rentals in the market.
Is that what they're focusing on for the reason of implementing this new change?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know.
I just think that, and I've shared this story on my LinkedIn, but of one that we've just evicted for no reason, and just reminding people that a good tenant isn't just someone who pays their rent and looks after the property. There's a third factor, and it is that you're a decent person to deal with, and what I'm calling, you're not a moral hazard.
Yep.
So, you know, this person, I was so worried that she was actually going to do something to herself and sue the owner, basically, for, like, I don't know, a broken toe or something stupid. She was constantly wanting to go to the media. She was an absolute crazy lady, and we just couldn't communicate with her. She would answer the door naked to contractors. She was an elderly lady, or an older lady, but she would answer the door naked. The owner feared actually going to do his own maintenance of the property because he didn't want to be put into a position where she might claim, you know, some sort of harassment. Yeah. So it was a real problem,
and that's probably one of the 1.8%. You know, that is a situation where the owner knows, everyone in that situation realises that this is untenable. The plumber doesn't want to turn up because, he or she doesn't want to be accused of something. The owner can't get a tradesperson to turn up and doesn't want to go and do his own work because he doesn't want to be accused. You're probably sitting there thinking, well, I don't want to send one of my staff there on their own. So you might have to send 2 or 3 property managers to do a routine, a job that might take 10, 15 minutes. You've got to commit 3 staff. So 45 minutes worth of, labour, to one job. And you sort of sit back and say, well, from a business, that's not economical. From a landlord's point of view, it's not economical for him. He's sitting back saying, this has to be easier. So that's their only lever. Now, in situations like this is where I think it's important to communicate that there are always going to be those situations where this very rarely used tool is put into action.
But what's going to happen if I can't put that into action?
What's going to happen? And a lot of landlords, as a business owner yourself, you would have received a survey from Real Estate Institute, and I'm sure there'll be more, and I'm sure there'll be others. But a significant proportion, I think somewhere around 61% of owners have said that they'll either will or seriously will consider selling their property.
Do you reckon that's a true, I know it's a true percentage, but do you really think that's correct?
Look, that's the numbers that have come back. Now, I always sort of say there's a great book I bought recently, and it was called, Never Panic Early. And I think, you throw something at someone, there's always early panic. And the knee-jerk reaction is, I want out. Now, there'll probably be those that say, look, actually, on reflection, okay, the change wasn't as bad. So that, let's say those changes proposed are moderated and people will pull back and say, look, actually, I can live with this. But there still will be a proportion who say, no, look, I can't live with this. This is not negotiable. I will sell my house because I can go and buy shares at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning and sell them at 4 in the afternoon and take a profit or loss and be done with it. I can sell another asset class a lot easier, or do what I want with it. So there will be those people. What impact that has on the market, not sure at the moment, but it will have those unintended and flow-on consequences.
Yeah. I nearly just about need to separate this podcast into 2, I think, Rob. But I've got one more question to discuss with you. And if we can just go back to the private landlords, do you know what the percentage of private landlords in Perth is, or in WA?
Not off the top of my head, but it is the largest comparative to other states.
Interesting, because I feel like more focus needs to be put on private landlords in terms of like whether it's that they need to register with DMers. I mean, I know this isn't going to solve the problem, but even like a little short course thing they have to do each year. So that's sort of what goes on in my head, I think would be great. So they actually have to, and they have to apply to be a registered landlord. But I'm also wondering whether there's an opportunity for property managers to potentially say to private landlords as a marketing technique, guys, when this law comes in, you want your property managed by a property manager, and whether it's an opportunity for us to get people to have their property managed.
Yeah, and I think that's twofold. And look, the benefit of, I guess, having worked in different states, you do get to see that. And coming to Western Australia was an eye-opener in terms of the proportion of private landlords looking for a rental property and sort of seeing a lot of ads that were private ads, overwhelmingly greater than Melbourne or Victoria. And that was an eye-opener, the overwhelming number of private landlords on that front. I think there's 2 opportunities here. One is for private landlords, obviously, to consider a professional property manager. And again, predominantly, your audience is property managers and real estate agents. So obviously, I don't want to preach the converted there. And obviously the vested interest there is that, we all run, real estate agencies. So yes, we'll benefit from that. But I think even from an industry point of view, looking at the bright side, I think, the moratoriums, the COVID legislation or the COVID Relief Act, whatever they named it, we had a few days to understand that act and the full impact of it. And by and large, we did it well. Got across it, understood what we could and couldn't do, and adapted to an entire new Act of Parliament within a span of about 5, 6, 7 days that we had from the point it was introduced to being implemented into legislation. So as property managers, we can do that. I think we're well placed to educate our clients on whatever the changes are coming. Now, there's a raft of proposed changes. They may not all be put up. They may not all get through. They may walk away from them completely, or they may implement, only certain sections of it. But I think, as PMs, I think we're pretty well prepared for change. And the last couple of years, I think, on a positive note, have taught us that, well, not everything's a certainty. A lot can change, but we can adapt.
Yeah, and we will, because we don't have any choice either.
We don't have a choice. You want to maintain your business and, we want to maintain our offering, we're going to have to.
Yeah. And one thing that I've read out of Victoria is that it's really affected the property managers. So it's going to be interesting to also see how that goes. And I've heard of people leaving the industry, or, starting to think about leaving the industry because they're worried about these changes. I mean, maybe they were people that were sort of sitting on the fence of retirement and not anyway. So it's a good opportunity now to sort of leave. Absolutely, that makes sense. But I hear in Victoria that it really has had a massive effect on the property managers. So that's a bit sad, I think, to see.
Yeah, look, it seems that way. I mean, look, there's always those who say, look, if things get any tougher, I'll go. And I think every industry has that segment, and that's okay. You sort of take it to a point, the cup fills up and you say, well, that's enough for me. And as you sort of say, oh, well, you're probably looking at the clock thinking, I'm close to retirement age, I might move on, or, I've been thinking of going to do something else. So this is a good opportunity. I don't want to learn some new skills. There'll be others who my wife's a good example of this. The moment the Draft Act comes out, she'll have read it from back to front 10 times over, and, by the end of the night, we'll have learned it. So there's people who either love it or hate it. So good opportunity for that. Again, but coming back to, is it the right time to do it? We're already in a skills shortage. Property management and real estate is no different. I mean, anyone who's attempted to or trying to hire, staff at the moment at all levels of the business are probably finding a great challenge there. There's not a lot of staff. There's not a lot of experienced staff either, So if you're looking to fill a role for someone who's got the competencies you need without having to train them from scratch, that's a challenge right now. So, but there's always going to be opportunity. And I think this will just produce that opportunity and maybe there'll be some forced turnover, no doubt.
And I think what I'm actually really excited about is diarising to speak to you in a year's time and just to see how it's all unfolded.
Yeah, look, I'd be happy to. I think, I think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge, but again, look, I'm sort of happy from my point of view that I am in a position where I can, even if not effect, shape the change. So, if you sort of say, well, look, some change may be inevitable, but I'm in a position now through the Real Estate Institute and through other organisations I'm involved with to shape that change and sort of take out whatever positives we can take from it, learn from the East Coast experiences and how that affected business owners, how that affected property managers and other real estate agents, and say, great, we can learn from that experience. If the change is going to happen, how do we make it positive? How do we get as best prepared as we can? Now, we may not like it, but it's our job to deal with it. And how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're always a bundle of knowledge, Rob. I appreciate you coming on and talking today because it's a great conversation. I mean, I just love talking, very conversationally about this topic. And I hope that people listening to it will also know that if they do want to make a change or the avenues to go to for that, but also getting property managers, like you said, just to accept that it does need modernising, it will be changed, and how to better equip yourself to accommodate it. So I think that's really important for people to hear. So, and we will do another one in 12 months' time and see whether it all went smoothly or not. That'll be exciting.
Look forward to it.
Rob, thank you. If anyone wants to reach out or find out a little bit more about how they can have an impact, please reach out to Rob. He's very Googleable. Rob Mandanici from Paddington Realty. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.